My 16-year-old daughter, Emma, was diagnosed with a rare heart condition on a Tuesday. I called my parents that same night. They told me they'd pray for her. Then they booked a 2-week anniversary trip to Tuscany. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I kept moving. And exactly 3 weeks later, everything they thought they'd secured for themselves started disappearing, piece by piece, quietly, the way a tide pulls sand from under your feet before you even notice you're sinking. I want to tell you the whole story, because it didn't start with Emma's diagnosis. It started long before that. In a house where one daughter got the world handed to her, and the other learned, very early, that she'd have to build her own. I was 22 when I had Emma. Her father and I were young, foolish, and fundamentally wrong for each other in every way that matters. He wasn't cruel, just completely absent in every sense of the word, financially, emotionally, physically. By the time Emma was 2, I had filed the paperwork, packed 2 bags, and moved us into a 1-bedroom apartment 30 minutes from my parents' house. I told myself that proximity would help, that they'd step in the way grandparents do in the movies casually, warmly, reliably. I was wrong about that too. My younger sister Brooke was the one my parents had always oriented themselves around. It wasn't something anyone said out loud. It was just the texture of everything. She got the car for her 16th birthday. I got a gas station gift card and a handshake. She got her college tuition paid in full. I took out loans, worked 25 hours a week at a diner, and graduated with a degree in business administration and a debt I didn't finish paying off until I was 29. When Brooke got married at 24, my parents threw her a rehearsal dinner at a waterfront venue with a live string quartet. They wore matching cream linen and cried the good kind of tears. When I mentioned I was seeing someone seriously a year later, my mother said, "Just make sure you're not rushing anything, given your situation." My situation. Emma, she meant. Like Emma was a condition I'd developed rather than a person I was raising. I stopped expecting things from them around the time Emma started school. It was easier that way. Less disappointment, less of that specific exhaustion that comes from hoping people will be different than they are. I worked 2 jobs, a full-time position at an insurance company, and weekend shifts doing bookkeeping for a small dental practice, and I built something stable enough that we didn't need rescuing. That was the thing about me they always took for granted. I was capable, so they convinced themselves they didn't need to show up. And for a long time, I let them believe that. Then came the Tuesday that split my life into before and after. Emma had been having episodes for a few months. Nothing dramatic, occasional dizziness, one fainting spell at soccer practice that everyone chalked up to the heat. Our pediatrician referred us to a cardiologist. The cardiologist ran tests. The cardiologist referred us to a specialist. The specialist sat across from me in a very clean office with a very calm voice and told me Emma had hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy. He explained it patiently, in plain English, in the way doctors do when they know the person sitting in front of them is trying very hard not to fall apart. The short version: her heart muscle had thickened in a way that was disrupting normal blood flow. Without intervention, the risk of sudden cardiac arrest was real. Not theoretical, real. There were 2 paths forward. The first was a catheter-based procedure, minimally invasive, newer technology, exceptional outcomes in Emma's specific case. The specialist said it was, in his opinion, the clear better option. High success rate, lower recovery time, significantly reduced risk of complications. The second was covered by insurance, an older surgical approach, more invasive, longer recovery, higher margin for the kind of post-operative issues that can follow a teenager for life. He wasn't telling me to choose the second one. He was telling me what insurance would pay for. I asked about the cost difference. He told me. I kept my face very still. I drove home and sat in the parking lot of our apartment building for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my dashboard. Then I called my parents. My mother answered. I told her everything, the diagnosis, the 2 options, the cost gap, the timeline the specialist had recommended. There was a pause on her end, not a thoughtful pause, a calculating one. "Is this something that has to happen right now?" she asked. I told her the specialist had recommended moving forward within 60 days to avoid the condition progressing further. "Well, 60 days isn't nothing," she said. "That's some time to figure things out." My dad got on the line. "How much are we talking exactly?" I told him again. Another pause. That's significant, he said. I mean, that's not a small ask, sweetheart. I told him I wasn't asking him to cover it. I told him I had some savings, but not enough. I told him I was looking at a medical loan but needed a cosigner to qualify for the amount I needed. Just their name on a document, I would handle every payment. They would never see a bill. My mother inhaled slowly. You know, your father and I have been working really hard on our finances lately. We've made some commitments. What kind of commitments? I asked. Well, she said, and her voice shifted into that specific register she used when she was about to say something she knew was wrong, but had decided to say anyway. We booked our anniversary trip. The Italy one we've been talking about for years. We leave in 10 days. I didn't say anything. It's been a hard couple of years, my dad added. We deserve this. You understand that, I said very carefully, that Emma could go into sudden cardiac arrest without this procedure. My mother said, the doctors always make it sound more urgent than it is. That's how they get you to spend money. My dad said, honey, your sister's kids are doing a whole thing this summer too, and we've already committed to helping with that, so our accounts are… I hung up. I don't remember walking upstairs, or unlocking the door, or sitting down on the kitchen floor, but that's where I found myself. Back against the cabinet under the sink, knees pulled up, phone face down beside me. Emma was in her room doing homework. I could hear the faint sound of whatever playlist she'd been listening to all week. I sat there for a while, not crying, just recalibrating. And then I started calling people. I want to be honest about how that felt. It felt humiliating. The particular kind of humiliation that lives in your chest for weeks afterward, that you wake up thinking about at 3 a.m. I'm a private person. I grew up in a family where you didn't talk about money, didn't ask for help, didn't let the neighbors know when things were hard. Calling people and saying my daughter has a heart condition and I need help felt like stepping out of my skin. But I did it anyway. The first person I called was a woman named Patrice, whose son played on Emma's soccer team. We'd spoken maybe a dozen times carpool logistics, the occasional sideline conversation. I stumbled through an explanation, and she didn't let me finish. Tell me the number, she said. I told her. I can do 1,500 by Thursday. What account do you want it in? I held the phone away from my face so she wouldn't hear me make the noise I made. It spread from there in a way I didn't expect and couldn't have engineered. Patrice told 2 people. Those 2 told others. Emma's soccer coach organized a quiet collection through the team parents. A woman from my church, who I'd spoken to maybe 3 times, sent a card with a check inside. My old college roommate, who lived in Phoenix and was raising twins on a teacher's salary, sent $400 with a text that said, just for Emma, no arguments. My coworker Marcus, who had his own medical bills and a car that needed 2 repairs he'd been putting off, handed me an envelope at work on a Friday afternoon without making eye contact. Don't say anything, he told me. Just take it. I tracked every cent in a spreadsheet. Every name, every amount, a note about how I planned to repay it. I stayed up late, entering numbers, while Emma slept. It was the only way I knew how to hold on to any sense of control. I was close, but not there yet, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. A Chicago area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. Is this Emma's mother? The voice asked. I said yes. My name is Thomas. I'm an estate attorney. I was your Uncle Raymond's lawyer. He paused. I'm so sorry about what Emma's going through. I heard through a mutual connection. I've been trying to reach you for about a year, actually. Another pause, the kind that makes the back of your neck go cold. Has anyone spoken to you about the trust Raymond established before he passed? I sat down. Uncle Ray had died 2.5 years earlier. Prostate cancer, quick and brutal at the end. He'd never married, no children of his own. Spent 30 years as a high school chemistry teacher in the same district where I grew up. He and I had always been close in the quiet way of people who understand each other without needing to say much. He used to take Emma to the Science Museum on Saturday mornings when she was small. She called him Uncle Rai Rai until she was old enough to find that embarrassing. What trust? I said. Thomas was very careful in how he spoke next. Raymond, he explained, had set aside a significant portion of his estate in a designated trust for Emma. For her education, her health care, her future. He'd been deliberate about it. He hadn't left it to me directly. He'd named my parents as trustees, intending for it to be held on Emma's behalf until she turned 18 or faced a qualifying medical need, whichever came first. Emma was 16. She had a qualifying medical need. Has there been any communication from your parents about this? Thomas asked. Any documentation? Any discussion of disbursement? No, I said. Nothing. The silence on his end said everything. I'm not going to tell you I was surprised. I think somewhere I had already suspected something. The way you suspect a smell before you open the refrigerator and find what's gone bad. The trips they'd started taking after Ray died. The new furniture. The way Brooke's kids suddenly had new everything, new tablets, new bikes, a beach vacation the previous summer that my mother had mentioned casually and then gone strangely quiet about. I put Emma to bed that night. I read her the kind of update you give when you want to tell the truth without loading more weight onto someone who's already carrying fear. I told her she was going to be okay. She said she knew. She trusted me in the particular way that teenagers trust their parents when they've been given reason to, not blindly, but deliberately. She'd earned her own version of clear-eyed realism growing up in our house, watching me navigate things without falling apart. After she was asleep, I went to the kitchen table and I opened my laptop. Thomas and I spent the next week working through documentation. The trust was real, notarized, airtight. Raymond had been meticulous. He'd even left a recorded statement explaining his intentions. In his own voice, steady and unhurried, because he knew my parents' tendencies better than most. The trust had been funded. The funds had been moved. Not to Emma. Not to a holding account pending her 18th birthday. To my parents' joint account, in a series of transfers that started 4 months after Raymond's funeral. The number was substantial. Not life-altering for someone wealthy. Life-altering for people like us. They had spent a portion of it already. The Italy trip. A kitchen renovation. A contribution to Brooke's family that my mother later described to a neighbor, apparently, as just helping out. Thomas walked me through our options with the kind of quiet steadiness that told me he'd been waiting to have this conversation for a while. He'd tried to reach me before, he said. My parents had intercepted at least 2 pieces of mail. He hadn't known about Emma's diagnosis when he first reached out, but he knew now, and he had a very clear opinion about how to proceed. This isn't complicated, legally, he said. They breached fiduciary duty. The trust was explicit. Emma was the beneficiary. They had no authority to use those funds for anything other than her welfare. I asked what that meant practically. It means, he said, that we can get her money back. 3 days later, I drove to my parents' house. They had just returned from Italy, tanned, relaxed, rolling luggage that still had the airline tags on it. My mother was wearing a floral dress, the color of the Amalfi Coast, probably looked at sunset. My father was on the phone when they pulled up, laughing at something. They saw me on the front steps and the laughter stopped. I handed my father the envelope. He looked at it the way people look at things they recognize even when they're pretending not to. What is this? My mother said. You've been served, I said. She said my name, in the voice she used when she wanted me to feel like a child. I turned around and walked back to my car. Behind me, I heard her say something sharp and rising in pitch. I didn't turn around. Emma was home with Patrice's daughter, watching a movie and eating too much popcorn, and that was what I kept in my mind as I pulled away from the curb. My daughter was alive. She was going to stay that way, and I was done asking permission. The procedure happened 6 weeks after the diagnosis. The funding came together, some from the collection people had organized, some from my savings, a bridge loan I'd managed to secure with a cosigner who turned out to be Marcus from work, who offered before I could even finish explaining, who never once made me feel small for needing it. Emma went into surgery at 7 in the morning on a Thursday. I held her hand until they wouldn't let me anymore. I sat in a waiting room for 4.5 hours, and I did not touch my phone. I just sat there, very still, and waited. She came out of surgery doing well. The specialist said the procedure went as well as it possibly could have. She'd be monitored, she'd have follow-ups, but she was going to be fine. I went into the bathroom and sat on the floor of a stall for a while. My parents did not call, not that day, not the day after. They called their lawyer. The civil case moved more quickly than I expected. Thomas was thorough in a way that left their attorney visibly unsettled bank records, transfer logs, the recorded statement from Raymond, Correspondence that showed my parents had been aware of the trust's terms and had deliberately chosen not to inform Emma or me of its existence. There was even an email my mother had sent to my father shortly after Raymond's funeral, in which she discussed the trust and referred to it as more than enough to work with for the next few years. Their attorney argued that my parents had simply misunderstood the terms of the trust, that they'd intended to transfer the funds when Emma turned 18, that the disbursements were temporary, a misallocation, not a theft. Thomas presented the email. The judge asked for the defense to address the phrase more than enough to work with. The defense attorney asked for a brief recess. It didn't help. The court ruled that my parents had breached their fiduciary duty in full. Emma was awarded the remainder of the trust, plus damages for the portion that had already been spent to be paid back from my parents' assets. The house they'd bought with the kitchen renovation. The retirement accounts. The vacation property Brooks' family had been using summers. It was a long list. By the end of it, my parents were looking at a life that was significantly smaller than the one they'd been constructing on Emma's money. Brooke called me during the proceedings. Once. She said, "I hope you're happy with yourself." I told her I was focused on Emma. She called me something I won't repeat here, and hung up. I heard later she had to return a portion of the contribution my parents had given her, which was categorized by the court as a distribution of trust funds made without authorization. I don't know how that affected her relationship with our parents. I don't ask. The criminal charges came later and moved faster than Thomas anticipated, in part because of what my parents did next. 2 months after the civil verdict, in violation of the court order governing their assets, my father attempted to transfer a substantial sum from a brokerage account into a joint account held under my aunt's name, his sister, who I don't think fully understood what she was facilitating. The digital trail was direct and undeniable. Thomas filed the same afternoon he discovered it. The second trial was quieter. My parents arrived without the composed, slightly offended demeanor they'd maintained throughout the civil case. My mother looked like she'd stopped sleeping. My father sat with his hands in his lap and stared at a point somewhere above the judge's head for most of the proceedings. Their attorney delivered arguments with the energy of someone who knew the outcome but had been paid to show up anyway. The judge found them guilty of breach of fiduciary duty, fraudulent transfer of trust assets, and contempt of a civil court order. She noted that the original breach had directly endangered a minor's access to necessary medical care. She sentenced them to 18 months of supervised probation, community service, full financial restitution, and barred them from serving as trustees or financial representatives for any individual going forward. It wasn't prison. I know some people felt that was too light. I heard the comments, I understood them. But I watched my parents walk out of that courthouse into a life they no longer recognized. No house, no vacation fund, no comfortable retirement, no reputation in the community they'd spent decades tending. I watched my mother get into a car that wasn't hers, borrowed from a cousin, and I felt something that wasn't satisfaction. It was something simpler than that. Something like the sensation when a headache finally breaks. Emma found out the full details of what her great-uncle had left for her the week the final documents came through. She sat at the kitchen table and read everything Thomas had prepared, page by page, without interrupting. Her hair was still in the ponytail from school. When she finished, she set the papers down and was quiet for a moment. "He knew," she said. "Not a question." I asked what she meant. "Uncle Rye," she said. "He knew what they were like. That's why he set it up that way. That's why he made it so careful." I told her I thought she was right. She looked at the table for another moment. Then she looked up. "I want to do something with it, not spend it. Do something with it." She'd thought about it already. I could tell. There are other kids who need procedures their insurance won't cover. I want to put some of it toward that, a fund or something. I didn't trust myself to say anything for a few seconds. "We can talk to Thomas about how to structure it," I finally said. She nodded. "I'm going to call it the Raymond Fund." She said it simply. No performance in it, just a decision she'd already made internally and was now sharing with me. He should be the one it's named after. Later that evening, after Emma had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I kept forgetting to drink. The apartment was quiet in the way it only gets late at night, when the building settles and the street outside goes still. I thought about the Tuesday everything changed. The parking lot, the 11 minutes on the dashboard clock, the kitchen floor. I thought about Patrice saying, "Tell me the number," without missing a beat. Marcus handing me the envelope without making eye contact. My college roommate in Phoenix with her twins and her teacher's salary and her $400. I thought about my parents in whatever apartment they were renting now, near the highway, in the part of town where you hear the trucks at night. I didn't feel sorry for them. I want to be honest about that. I've thought about whether I should, whether grace or time or the right perspective might get me there, and so far the answer is no. Maybe that will change. But right now, every time I start down that road, I think about Emma in that waiting room recliner the morning of her procedure. Legs too long for the chair, earbuds in, telling me she wasn't scared when I asked. I think about what would have happened if I'd had access to Raymond's trust from the beginning. I think about the 4.5 hours I sat alone, not touching my phone. I don't arrive at forgiveness from there. I arrive at something else. A few weeks after the verdict, Emma came home from school and dropped her backpack by the door in the way she does when she has something on her mind and is deciding whether to say it. I asked how her day was. She said fine. She poured a glass of water. She looked at the window for a second. Then she said, "You know what I keep thinking about?" I said, "What?" "All those people who helped us," she said. "Patrice, Marcus, your old roommate, that woman from church, whose name I still don't know." She turned from the window. None of them owed us anything, and they showed up. She paused. That means something about people. Like, in general. I told her I thought she was right. She picked up her backpack and went to her room. A minute later, I heard the playlist start up again, the same one she'd been listening to the week of her diagnosis. It sounded different now. Less like background noise, more like something she'd chosen. I finished my coffee. I opened my laptop and transferred the first installment of repayment to Patrice. I moved down the spreadsheet, name by name, and I thought about how I'd built that list in the worst week of my life, and how it had turned out to be, in some way I hadn't expected, a record of every person who was worth knowing. Emma was going to be okay. The Raymond Fund was in the process of being established. Thomas had sent over the initial paperwork with a note that said, "Uncle Ray would have been proud," and I'd had to put my phone face down on the counter for a minute after reading it. That night, while Emma slept, I sat by her door the way I used to when she was very small, and I needed to reassure myself she was still breathing. She was. Steadily, evenly, her heart doing what hearts are supposed to do. What hers was going to keep doing for a long time. I didn't post anything about any of it. I never went public, never put their names anywhere, never made a speech. I didn't need to. Justice has its own way of circulating. People talk. The truth finds its level. And I had Emma. Everything else was just math.